So often people ask me, when I say Asian Development Bank, they think I'm a banker. And they start asking me where to invest, stock market. Now, unfortunately, I'm not that type of banker. I'm D part of the B, Asian Development Bank. So when I went to Asian Development Bank, I was a forestry specialist, then worked through different positions. So I will be basically talking about a project I'm advising on, which is focused on these issues of the farming crisis, malnutrition, rural distress and development. And those of you who are in the field know that these are not mutually exclusive things. So let me, I'll do two parts. One, I'm going to use my freebie from ADB, a very nice video to set the scene for this forum. So let's start with that, and then you'll have to help me. My eyes are so bad, so I can't see where to click. It's here somewhere, I know. So this video is about 1.5 minutes. We use this to introduce to everyone at the start of the forum.
Asia is expected to reach a population of over 4.9 billion by 2030 and maintain an economic growth rate of more than 5%. As our region grows both in numbers and wealth, supplying sufficient, nutritious, safe and affordable food remains a critical challenge. In the rural areas of Asia, millions of smallholder farmers who produce 80% of the region's food find it difficult to make a livable income. Our food producers and their families are trapped in poverty, earning a pittance because of dysfunctional markets. Malnutrition is a major social issue. How do we transform farming and consolidate small and fragmented farms to achieve food security and rural prosperity? How can we secure our future food supply with an aging farming population, while our young people turn away from farming? How can the increasing number of women farmers be successful without equal access to education, finance, and productive assets? How can we supply safe food when our land and water resources are becoming polluted and contaminated? How prepared are we to cope with the impact of climate change on food production? These are some of the critical issues to be addressed at the Rural Development and Food Security Forum 2019. The forum is a call to action to support our farmers and farming communities. It's a call to governments in the region to provide leadership to spur rural development and ensure sufficient, safe, nutritious and affordable food across Asia and the Pacific.
So I hope you like that video. It's pretty much sets the scene for and identifies as, just a flag for you, 3 key themes of the forum were the farming crisis and malnutrition and rural development. Let me just go over the outline of my presentation. Now, context, the video already provided. I'll elaborate a bit more on it. Then the second is the beat of my presentation is what are the, at least from my perspective, in designing my main task was to design the forum in terms of the key themes and structure of sessions and identifying keynote speakers. I did identify one of our, the nutrition professor, Professor Benstrup. Yeah. Unfortunately, you couldn't make it for some reason. So that was my main task. So what I'm presenting you is now reflections during the forum, after the forum, and now we are in the process of documenting post-forum publications. There will be a couple of them. So these are my impressions of what happened during the forum. What were at least takeaways for me. And out of those 3 themes, because of the time constraint, I'm going to focus on farming crisis. I'm going to make some reference to other 2 elements because these are all, as I said, interconnected on malnutrition issues as well as rural prosperity or rural decline or rural distress, whatever way you want to put it. So then the last session is, we have been thinking about post-forum, what are the key knowledge gaps which will allow us to move in the right direction. that's the last part, and I hope that will be of interest to the audience here, both students, faculty, to see at least this is not ADB's perspective. I want to make it clear, it's my perspective. I'm not speaking on behalf of ADB, though I work for them right now as a consultant. Now, briefly to locate in terms of ADB operations. ADB has had a strategy in 2000 with the focus on poverty-free Asia Pacific. So in 2018, they started revisiting that to look forward for another 10 years. So that is the strategy. Now it retains the focus on poverty evaluation or reduction or elimination, but it has now 4 pillars to that vision, and that is prosperous Asia and prosperity, primarily economic growth and other associated investments. Then inclusive growth, whether from economic point of view or gender point of view, locational point of view, all those dimensions. Resilient, both in terms of economic shocks, but more importantly in the climate change environment. And sustainability, which is an ongoing challenge. So those are the 4 strategic priorities ADB has had, and that will inform its operations for next 10 years or so. Now, these are the 7 operational priorities. So to translate those vision objectives, these are the 7 pillars of the strategy. So first one is addressing remaining poverty and reducing inequalities. That's one theme. So it comes social sectors, education sector, health sector, governance sector, finance sector, so it's all encompassing. Then the second one is green, tackling climate change, building climate and disaster resilience, and enhancing environmental sustainability. The one we are going to talk about, or subset of the operational priorities today, is promoting rural development and food security. And then, of course, the other ones, fostering regional and economic cooperation integration. By the way, ADB in its charter, it's one of the few regional banks, as far as I know, World Bank doesn't have it. We have in our charter that we should have a regional integration and cooperation program. And so since its inception, we have had that. Accelerating progress in gender equity, equality, has been the theme, but now it's an operational priority. It used to be just a consideration, but now you have to actively work and invest in it. Making cities more livable, mostly urban sectors, so both soft and hard interventions, and strengthening governance and institutional capacities. That's a cross-cutting theme anyway. So that's the context in terms of operation. The forum was put together to help our ADB colleagues to take this pillar and now translate into what they call operational plan. Now, operational plan 5 deals with the food security and rural. So the forum was to help ADB think about it, how to do it, what we have done in the past, not we, what ADB has done in the past, and what they want to do in the future. So that is the corporate context of this presentation. Now, the numbers there is just to put another, and Steve's video already talked about, we are looking at 4.9 billion population by 2030, which would be about 60% of global population. The estimates are models, there will be ups and downs, but our economists tell us we will be looking at definitely about 5% GDP growth rate, averaging about 6.56. There's always these shocks, which nobody can predict. And economic growth, more populous population, more wealthier population, common sense tells us they will want more food or better food, diversified food. So food security issues are at the heart of this growth demand. Now, this all has to happen. On one hand, we are going to have a 60% of global population, but our natural resource or arable land is just 35% of global. So this, of course, trade and other things will play their part. So that's the broader context of this presentation. or sub-theme of this presentation. So briefly, as I said, the forum was to seek knowledge. And I'm hoping that this session and sessions after this and discussions bilaterally would help us capture the knowledge from you guys also, because my role is to capture now in the post-forum phase what can be done. And from global, regional, and local stakeholders, experts, and practitioners. And basically, we're looking at enabling policies, technologies, and of course, investments. And those three themes: farming, crisis, malnutrition, as both a food security challenge and as a development challenge, and rural distress, again, a development as well as agriculture sector, natural resource sector challenge. So I'm going to focus on the farming distress part of it, because that's the time we have. Now, I'm going to walk you through what I took away, the key messages from my own, and we have shared with the team in the ADB, and we're in the process of finalizing some of these. What are the key causes, or some of the key causes of this distress, and what are some of the consequences that arise from that, which obviously should lead then, how do you respond to those consequences, what can be done? So that's the idea. The first one was small and fragmented landholdings leading to. Now, as you know, Asia, especially in Asian context, what is it, about 350 million smallholders in Asia. We account for 70%, I think, of the smallholders. The key constant, at least in the common discourse previously and even now, is that small holdings are a constraint. And we'll get into it, what kind of constraint. So that is still being seen as that has led to inadequate mechanization that results in subpar yields and production on a farm level. It also leads to high production and marketing costs, limited smallholder bargaining power, and this is those, your experts here, those who deal with the whole issue of aggregation problems, because smallholders dispersed, they cannot aggregate, the cost of input supplies, efficiencies are low, their marketing efficiencies are low, so this whole issue of smallholders, and there are other issues as well, which constrain smallholder from having the bargaining power. And that has implications, and we'll talk about that. Now, at least the one key message from these three constraints is that currently there's no thorough meta-analysis, but I did some work in India and in my state in Kashmir and some little bit in Bihar. It's no scientifically done sampling, and there is some other evidence that currently in Asia, a farming smallholder earns 1/3 of what's the livable income. So 2/3 deficit. Of course, they make it for non-farm income, and then there are safety nets investment, but that is a reality. Now, if you have a livelihood where you can only make 1/3 of your livable income, first, what does it do for that community, farming community? But more importantly, what does it do for the food security? We talked about demand. So these are the issues we were trying to get a handle on. Next cause, a key cause we identified, was poor agricultural logistics. It's both hardware, transport, storage, cold storage, all those things and are producing high post-harvest losses. So inefficient and insufficient agri-food value chains and transportation infrastructure, resulting in loss of over 40% of fruits and vegetables. It's not a small amount. 35% of the catch is spoiled before it reaches the market. 25% of grains, and about 20% of dairy products. This is what is lost before it gets anywhere. So what are the consequences of that? One, farmers suffer loss. They don't get any. They produce that. It's lost before they can get any returns on it. Consumers face higher prices. And in Asia, currently, low-income families spend about 50% of their income on food. So if food prices go up, partly driven by these factors, then their ability to access or afford healthier food in terms of vegetables and fruits and all is definitely constrained. And that has its own knock-on effects on malnutrition and everything else. Now, you'll bear with me. I can't keep everything in my head. So once in a while, I'll go to my sheet and try to make sure that I'm not missing anything. But if you want any specific questions after the session, I'll try to fill in if you think there's any gap in my communication. So I have so far covered what is the context. I've given you the big picture, population, demand, expected food demand. I've talked about the farming crisis. I've started touching upon the two causes. One was small fragmented land holdings and the effect that has it. And then on the post-forest losses and the implication for malnutrition and social capital development and related issues. And now, that's what old age does to you. You have to keep on switching classes. The other one is it's a big ticket item, and I know that a lot of people don't like this term, dysfunctional markets. But ADB bosses decided to keep it, and I was just a consultant. So I went along with it. But I think it's a relevant theme. We may disagree on the terminology. First is definitely there's market fragmentation in, Terry, you know much better than me, the outdated policies and regulatory frameworks, trading cartels and local monopolies, large number of middlemen because the value chains and supply chains are long and inefficient, sometimes broken, dilapidated wholesale market infrastructure, lack of cold chain infrastructure. So all these elements in combination or in isolation are resulting in these high post-harvest losses and other elements. So what are the consequences? Diminishing smallholder share in retail price around, so this is a sort of topic close to my heart. Historically, say in Vietnam, 20, 30 years ago, a rice farmer, if a retailer sold a kilogram of rice for, say, $1, the rice farmer, the grower, would get about 45 cents. That was the historical price transmission, so-called. Right now in in Asia, people can argue about figures, it's around 25%. I read a case last year, a potato grower in India's Pune city, he got a return of 5% as low as, it doesn't even pay for production, forget about other things. So what does that lack of return on their investment do for their own incomes, for their interest in the farming, for investment in the farming? It's all coming into play, and you get into a negative downward spiral in terms of lack of investment, lack of incentives, and the rest. Extreme market volatility. You have ups and downs in the market, so planning for a grower, if he or she doesn't know what's going to happen in the market, and so even annual crops like potatoes, onions, tomatoes, you cannot suddenly shift. And in the last 10 years, at least the Indian case, or most of the Asian case, there has been these cyclical booms and busts every 3 years. And there are now actually good analysis of why that's happening. And some of it is happening because of the causes or the factors I just mentioned in terms of constraints. Now, the consequence of that low return is that on a farming level, investments in, why should you invest? They're trying to get by. They don't have any surplus savings or capital to invest in improving their productivity. It's on the farmer level or farm level. Similar issues are happening at the public sector level, public investment in general, because the fiscal space for governments, whether state, local, or even national, because of the underperformance of the sector, it's not generating enough growth, it's not generating enough surplus, so the fiscal situation is also crashing, collapsing. And so you have a double whammy. The local farmer doesn't have any spare capital to invest to improve his situation in terms of production. The public sector investment is also not sufficiently robust to fill in the gap. So that's another issue in terms of food security, quality food production, sustainable food production, and the related issues. Somebody needs to alert me about time, because I have a tendency of overshooting, unfortunately, and I don't want to do that here. This is a big one, but limited access to technology, we all know that, credit, and in fact, and I'll get to it, especially women, access to these assets and credit finance, and also equally important, timely technical and market information. People say extension centers. India had a huge training and visit program initiated by World Bank. We all were excited. I was a young man there. I was on the receiving of that extension side, but then it collapsed. It didn't work for various reasons. But the fact is that you still need, actually you need more knowledge now because of the complexity of what farmers are dealing with from production and other. Great constraints on women farmers whose share of agricultural labor is now 40 to 50%. And it's partly happening because of, in a lot of rural areas, if you're making 1/3 of what you need, most men are going out as a labor, internally or to foreign countries, overseas foreign workers, and most of the burdens of farming is shifting to women household head. And that has its own implications in terms of overall family situation. So on practical terms, some of the statistics there, we see because of these factors, the production level is at 40 to 50% of where it could be if all those factors were properly handled. It also results in that you still have to plow, you still have to apply materials, but if you're not getting the right production, so you are not getting the best out of your capital, you are not getting the best return from your labor, and more importantly, increasingly in Asia, especially the big countries, and even Southeast Asia, and Indonesia, Philippines, all these countries are now facing strong planetary boundaries, land and water issues. Reduce farmer profitability and income. That's what is now playing out as far as constraints are concerned. Another structural constraint that's happening now, aging farming community. Average age of farmer in Asia is now 60 years. Now, from Jim's and my perspective, it's still young, but from a production perspective, it calls into question unless we create robots for ourselves. Young youth don't want to do farming. And I can see why. I graduated, and I don't know, Jim, I have told this story to Jim so many times, he's going to close his ears. When I graduated from high school, from college, I wanted to be a farmer. I'm managing a family orchard of 2 hectares in Kashmir right now. I am a so-called armchair farmer. But even then, and my parents said, hey guy, and all my siblings were doctors. I partly wanted to escape the hard work, farming. I didn't realize how hard it is. So to cut the long story short, even then, I basically didn't go for that as a main livelihood because the returns and income was not there. So, and the physical drudgery it's not Iowa corn or soybean farm, you get a harvester and you're air conditioned. It is hard manual labor, backbreaking. And I did, in my young age, I was about 26. I lasted, in paddy you have to do weeding. I lasted 3 hours, and with my relatives. So I said, no, paddy cultivation, leave it out. I'll do orchard management, which the ruin post. But it's hard work. So the point is that, and especially in Asia, because of lack of mechanization, that drudgery has not gone away. It's still physically demanding. So the consequences are farm and rural labor skill shortage because you don't have younger people coming in. And if you want to train them in new technologies, you are either training old people or they are not educated or skilled enough to pick up new skills. So that's becoming a constraint. And that has consequences in sub-farm productivity. Rural flight, I told you this, particularly youth are running away. I mean, there are a lot of parallels what's happening in Asia to what's happening in US. I mean, I heard somewhere in US the transmission is about 15% in some cases. So it's not that different a scenario. Maybe in this developed country context is irrelevant in these kinds of sort of conversions. Of course, urban overcrowding, you would go to urban areas, they cannot absorb everyone, job-wise, otherwise, and you get into an issue of decay and overcrowding and associated problems. Climate change. It is really going to be a big factor in how this question will be as challenged, this problem will be addressed. We already are seeing that because of the projected, these are projections by the way, 2050, this was work done by our climate change department. Our means, again, you'll excuse me, I keep on still thinking I'm in ADB. I'm not. But ADB team did the study in 2050, or is it? Anyway, maybe I'm misplacing who the authors are, but ADB was involved. Irrigated rice yield projections will decline by 14 to 20%, wheat 32 to 44%, soybeans 9 to 18%. Translating those yield gaps, you're going to have likely anywhere from projecting price increases in rice, wheat, and soybean, anywhere from 10 to 50%. So the price hikes, and we have seen what happens with price hikes. We have seen in 12, 15 in Asia with the food price crises. So that's what we are looking at as we think ahead. Now, the other, and this was one thing which really fascinated me in this forum. I was not aware of it. Cornell most probably already is aware of it. We had a presenter from University of Nebraska, I think, where they are looking at what we know that carbon dioxide increase in global warming will affect productivity and everything else, in terms of the pathways of water shortages, the pathways of temperature effect on crop patterns, seasonality, those are understood, and the issue on yield productivity and other things. But one interesting thing this presenter told us, and this is what I'm reporting, that carbon dioxide levels, forget about the quantity, they are starting to influence, not will, they are starting to influence the protein, micronutrients, and vitamin content of rice. So it's not only how much food will be available, it is how nutritious it will be. So you're going to have both a supply, quantity issue, and you're going to have a quality issue. And right now in Asia, there are about 80 million malnourished children. I think we have half of world's malnourished people or children. And about, I have a number somewhere. Let me check. I don't want to mislead you guys. I wrote it somewhere, so let me catch it before you guys say you're talking nonsense. 150 million, sorry, that's the numbers. 150 million suffer from malnutrition in Asia. 80 million children under the age of 5 subject to stunting. 80 million children. In practical terms, those 80 million children are lost. I mean, I hope, I'm not talking physically, to the whole society and community as productive individuals. So that is the consequence of some of these things. One constraint very close to our heart, Louise, myself, Jim, environmental degradation. About 80% of fresh water withdrawal for irrigation in Asia. And we already know that our subsurface, groundwater, even surface water resources are in decline for various reasons, both quantity and quality issues, and the video sort of indicated what the pressures are. The irrigation efficiency, my irrigation engineers, I'm not an expert, they say 37% is not good. I don't know what is a good efficiency. I hope Cornell can help us. But generally the consensus, this is not the right level of efficiency. Green, the carryover or negative impact of green revolution is now creating problems. And we all know about degradation of soils, degradation of and heavy metals in the soils, serious problems of contamination, China, India, Vietnam, and this is now coming through the food chain. Really, we are, I mean, in ADB, we used to go to this cafeteria and our colleagues would sit with our bosses and we'd say, you know what, we are eating poison and you guys don't give us money to fix this thing. So I mean, sometimes we used to exaggerate, but the fact is that the whole food chain, supply chain, because of the supply, both soil and water, irrigation water, is highly polluted. And the food safety system, whether it could be filtered or detected, are weak. So that's another, and then it has health consequences. So farm, land, and soil degradation, I think I have a figure here. It's, what was it, 30, I think 34% in South Asia of land area is, 34% is degraded, and about 30 million hectares of land in South Asia is pretty much so degraded that it's marginal in production. From a quantity perspective, also the quality issues. South Asia loses about $10 billion a year because of this problem. These are some documented figures. So consequences, increased competition for scarce water, increased irrigation costs, reduced farmer profitability and income, farm soil quality compromise, reduces productivity, reduces incomes, the benefit flows, and of course there are feedback loops into whole environmental sustainability and climate change dimensions of this issue. Okay, I'll stop. Let me walk through you quickly, and then we can do more of discussion in the Q&A. So beyond farm, I would highlight two causes: reduced farmer rural income. It's not just farm; it's a general issue of which has macroeconomic poverty issues, rural economy, rural prosperity, and insufficient non-farm income and employment. It's a sort of, because you are not doing well in agriculture, anything else associated where you could compensate for the failure or limitations is not happening. So you have a loss of rural demand. And it is not, now in India you have seen that India is going through a pretty bad economic situation. Its growth rates are below par, 5%, maybe they are exaggerated anyway, or fudged. But the reality is that in many of these economies, India, 45, 50% of the workforce and 60% of the population lives in rural areas, and most of them are in agriculture. If rural economy is not doing well, the aggregate demand is down, so it has a knock-on effect on the overall aggregate demand. So a lot of people, a lot of economists are of the view that both formal agriculture sector, and remember that what you see on papers is talking only about the formal sector. In India, there's a huge informal sector, which unfortunately, we don't get a good handle on. But if you look at what is dragging the economy, that is the underperformance of rural sector. And if it's not corrected, it will be more difficult. And I have listed those. So we can come back to those questions. I know Louise is getting impatient with me for right reasons. Reduced farmer income, stress and strain. Okay, and I have sort of indicated that when both individual level and at the state level and at the government level, the fiscal space for balancing these constraints or investing in infrastructure that will correct the situation are collapsing or squeezing. Now I want to shift gears. So what I have tried to do is give a general idea of what are some of the, from my perspective, key causes of this so-called farming crisis or farmer crisis. People have go back and forth on that. And what are the consequences for malnutrition, for rural prosperity, and even general economic development, and gender issues, climate change issues. So these are sort of schemes. Now, what I would like to talk in about, how many minutes?
You still have 12 minutes.
Oh.
Then we have to leave.
Okay, so I'll do it in 2 minutes and then we can go to the questions. So these are some of the things I think as a research and knowledge center Cornell, could help Asia and ADB to answer or at least explore. Is there a robust analytical framework for complex, I mean, food, these things, as we have stated, is complex systems, but in order to find the right answers, do we have the right tools of thinking and analysis? And can Cornell, on its own, with ADB or with others, look at what this framework should do, what this framework can be? At least in our work, we didn't find a really useful one. Even at the forum, this was sort of one of the takeaways, that there is not a existing robust analytical framework. Maybe we didn't get the right people, but that was the. And then, is there an analytical frame, robust analytical framework for rural development policy and strategy? Because ultimately you want to translate it into actions, linking, and the whole challenge of linking rural and urban development. How do we deal with structural constraints? For example, you cannot do away with the smallholders, 350 million smallholders, and solve the food problem. That's there, that's a given. So what do you do about that? Where is the evidence to inform the income versus input supply policy debate? There has been this debate going on that input subsidies and others are not very efficient, so you should go to direct income support. And where does consensus come? What is the evidence for either or? There have been this talk about, okay, the way out is sustainable intensification. Is there analytical technology and knowledge and know-how for a paradigm shift? What does it mean, and how do you go about it? I think this is the last slide. How do we design, implement complex multi-sector integrated projects? This is not a new idea. If you want to solve malnutrition, you need, of course, agriculture, then you need sanitation guys, you need education guys, you need at least those three sectors to work together. But it's not easy to get them together. So what are those? What role do digital technologies? ADB has a digital agriculture platform. I have once in a while referred to it. What can these things do in terms of whether they're called AgTech, FinTech, there's all kinds of fancy terms, in terms of addressing these structural constraints? For example, the smallholder farming. There were some good ideas there. What is the policy technology mix that will help us overcome dysfunctional agriculture markets? These are some of the links you can look into, and some of the figures, these reports that were put out by ADB, they're on the web, those are the web links. So you're free to visit and see what they say. Thank you.
Thank you for taking time. I'm sure there'll be a question, so why don't you just field them yourself?
Sure. Yes, please.
What has been the role of like regional or municipal authorities in providing support for smallholder farmers and agriculture? And are you in any way, or is ADB in any way seeking to kind of like collaborate with them, or is it mostly like introducing it independently?
No, ADB does, I mean, we have been working, even in this work, we have been part, our global CGIAR systems have been part of this work, right up from IFPRI to IRI to all these CGIAR systems are involved with our work, so that's one stream. Then in our operations, I keep on saying sorry, I can't get it. In the ADB operations, when we do agricultural projects, our primary partners are governments, but that doesn't mean that we don't seek input from, there are other civil society, think tanks, and so we bring in either individually or as experts to work with us on strategies, or especially, and the one idea is actually, and I'm working on that now here, is to take these issues forward and see who can do what best. And that includes not just universities, but other partners as well, globally as well as regionally. Our emphasis will be regional, because we are an Asian Development Bank, but knowledge is not regional, so we'll hopefully capture global angles. Did I answer your question? I'm a bit hard of hearing, so I don't know if I caught it.
No, you did. I was just trying to get more of a sense of like what were kind of like the shortcomings of like municipalities, like in providing support initially.
Oh, okay. Well, municipalities, you're talking of municipalities in Asia, by and large, deal with urban issues, basic services, right? And municipalities, by definition in Asia, at least it's my take, are weak. And they are not weak because they want to be weak, because they are not empowered. You give them a lot of responsibilities, but there are no resources, they don't have enough people, they don't have enough budget. So on a majority, I can't talk about China because China is different. And I don't know China that well, but whatever little I know, it's a bit different. Indonesia, I know a bit. I know Mekong countries a lot more better. I know Yunnan and Guangxi in China better because I used to work there. I'm part of ADB. So, yeah, municipalities, if you are doing urban sector, urban poverty issues, urban food security issues, there are huge urban food security issues. It's becoming a huge question about, and it's even here, access to quality food. Urban areas in US, in New York State. Actually, I have one of my relatives, we Kashmiris are all over, by the way, is in SUNY Buffalo, and her main work is in SUNY Buffalo is on local urban food systems. And why? And that has a nutritional angle to it. She's working on that. So urban municipalities have a role, but they are not really in Asia. I haven't come across a very robust municipality who can handle these issues. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. I thought I had a gag order on you. I told Jim I'm going to do this presentation only if you don't ask me a question. Because I know he will ask me, he will treat me like I was in a, what was it called, defense, Ph.D. defense, which I passed, thankful to my guru. He's my guru, by the way. Whatever I know and whatever I learned, he is responsible maybe 60%. So if I made mistakes.
Now I forgot my question.
That is the Kashmiri style, diversion.
Whenever I see post-harvest loss, wherever they are, they're always shocked. I mean, especially in the face of food insecurity and everything you talked about before. Across Asia, it's a guess, but I imagine a lot of that human food waste goes into animal feeds, and so it may be unfit, or does it end up in landfills like what happens, with much of that in a place like the U.S. I'm thinking of that it may feed back into.
Yeah, it's a waste. When they say loss, it's loss from a food processing excess, agri-food affordability, all those within the sector, that dimension. Some of it is not totally lost. I mean, it goes somewhere else, as you're saying. It goes to, I'll give a very simple example and this mindset. I work, as I said, on this apple orchard in Kashmir. And I used to see, even in our orchard, it's a very young orchard, there was a lot of apples on the ground, which you cannot market, poor quality. So it's a law for post-harvest loss, basically, technically. But then I asked our colleagues, I said, where does this go? Do you dump it? What do you do with it? He said, no, we make money out of it. I said, how do you make money out of it? Because there are 1 million Indian soldiers, security people, who don't have high income, but they like to eat apples. And they're standing on these streets for 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., nothing to do. So all these hawkers take this low-quality fruit, which technically is post-harvest loss, and they sell it. So there are many other channels that happen. But short answer is, when we are talking of these numbers, we are talking in terms of the food chain or value chain in that context. So that's how I would. Yeah.
You did a masterful job laying out the issues, the causes, the consequences. Really nice framework. I'm curious about whether this forum also had a parallel focus on innovations, so that we could see what some of the kinds of solutions that are playing out are the technical, the organizational. When I think about the smallholder crisis, I'm not an Asian at all. Most of my experience is the first thing I want to work on is how do we help farmers organize? How do we help them get access to appropriate mechanization? And how do we overcome some of these constraints that smallholders face? And I'm just wondering if you have sort of a parallel set of themes on what are the innovations that are out there that can be built on.
I'm glad you asked that question. There were actually specific sessions addressed to those. We started exploring what are the answers like you are asking. So there was, for example, this whole fragmentation issues, aggregation issues, supply chains, volume, scale. Now we have, that's where this AgTech, FinTech comes. Because these instruments, whether it's a drone, AI, whatever, all these instruments, they are scale neutral in a sense. You can use them. You don't have to now have huge extension systems. And actually, there are very good examples from India and Indonesia and Philippines where a lot of startups, and that's where the youth is now coming back to agriculture sector. They're coming into the tech side, and they're finding answers to this. It's like Uber going around, agriculture Uber in India. So that's where the tech, and there was some discussion. In fact, if you go to the link, there's a lot of material. I couldn't go into that detail, but it was there. But it's still not clear, and I go back to the main question I'm trying to flag. Even if those technologies are available, even if those technologies can be deployed, what is the policy framework under which they can be? For ADB, you cannot just say, okay, give a startup money. So for ADB or development governments, you have to have some framework, policy framework, advice, the criteria, some conditions. What are the conditions? What filters their decisions? At least in the forum, we were struggling. We didn't get that answer, especially in rural development. Everybody talked about paradigm shift. Everybody talked about cross-sectoral coordination. And when they gave their presentations, they went to their, IRI went to their rice, somebody went to their water, somebody went to their road. So we all talk of cross-sectoral, but when it comes to doing the paradigm shift, and partly it is, we first thought that maybe we were idiots in the team, we didn't know what to do. We looked around, we couldn't find people. And then we talked to the experts, we tried to find sources. My at least takeaway is that that's a knowledge gap. We don't know, we didn't learn enough from IRDPs, Integrated Rural Development Projects. They tried to do this, right, 80, 90 years. These young people most probably don't know what IRDPs are, or those conservation guys who talked about Integrated Conservation and Development Projects. They did the same thing, combining conservation and development. They suffered from failure after failure. Now, I have a thesis on that, but I will charge money for that if you want to find the answer. Why they failed and what are some of the answers. But even in this forum, and my impression is, and I would leave it with you as a final thought, technology, of course, technology is not value-free. Even these agtech, fintech can be very, will enhance inequities or other issues of data, privacy, and all that. And especially if you are in India nowadays, I wouldn't trust anything given this present government with my information. But that's my personal situation. But technology, I think, especially these structural things, I see a huge potential for digital technologies to address some of these structural constraints, especially in this whole aggregation issue, because that's where the scale constraint technology can handle it. Of course, it needs proper regulatory policy framework. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.